Yo guys, Ponchi here, and today we're gonna go over summing on our Big Six with Ableton. Now some of you may have already seen my video on Logic. If you have, you'll be well ahead of the game, and I'll just show you how to do it on Ableton. But for those of you that have not seen any of these summing videos yet, hopefully this will help you in the process and maybe potentially convince you to buy a Big Six if that's something you're looking for. This is not a sponsored video. I'm just simply showing you how I do things with my Big Six. So let's get started. So on Ableton here, I have this track. Now I've already printed a summed mix on Ableton here. So this is what it sounds like. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show you the steps that I took to get to that point. So let's go over to the session view here. And these are all the tracks that I have. They're not all used, however. If you come back over here, you'll notice that I don't have, I have a few of these that are just muted and kind of closed out. So I'm not using those tracks. I'm just using these that are open here. So I have one drum track, which is a MIDI drum track that was recorded with Steven Slate drums and recorded with a MIDI electronic drum kit, recorded over MIDI. And then I have two guitar tracks here. I have a bass and DI track. I believe I only ended up using the DI. One is a DI and one is a mic. I'm pretty sure I only ended up using the DI, so I'm just going to go ahead and close that out. And then over here I have a vocal track, and that's pretty much it. So if you go over to the session view here, the main thing, first thing you got to do is set up your external outs. So basically you want to set up each track to an external out on the Big Six individually, so each track has its own section on the Big Six. So the way I kind of organized it, and the biggest thing you got to keep in mind is which ones you want to be mono and which ones you want to be stereo. So if we go over to the Big Six, you'll notice, of course, that the first four are the mono tracks, and then these four here are stereo tracks, and then you also have the external inputs up here as well. This is 13 and 14, and 15 and 16. So I'll kind of show you the way I have it set up here. So I have my drums. I want my drums in stereo. So I have that going out to 5 and 6. So by default, it'll be set to master. So what you want to do is set it to external out and then set that to 5 and 6. And then I have the two guitar tracks here. Set those both to external out. And then I want them to go to the same track. So I have those going to track 2. And yes, that does mean that my guitars are going to be in mono. So if you wanted to do them in stereo, you would set them to, for example, 7 and 8, and then you would make sure that these are panned. I want those to be in mono, so I'm going to keep that one at the center. And then, let's see, going over to my bass, I just used the DI, so I wanted that to go to track 1. Again, the bass is also going to be mono, so that's the only bass track I have. And then the vocals are going to track 3, also just mono. And then interestingly, over here I have a couple sends that I used, which were UAD plugins. So if we click on these tracks, you'll see I have the Capital Chambers, there we go, Capital Chambers reverb on this send, and then on on B here, I have the Galaxy Tape Echo. And the only tracks I'm sending to those two are actually the vocals, which you can see right here. Oh, it does appear that I have a little bit of the bass going to it. I'm just going to leave that the way it was. I didn't remember that I had put some reverb on the bass, but I guess that was the decision I made in the mixing. I don't want to touch it from where I had it before, so anyway. And then I guess also on the guitar I had a little bit going as well. So I want these both to be going to the reverb, and then I have the bass going to a little bit of reverb as well. Turn that one down. And then the vocals over here, you can see that I have both going to the reverb and the delay. So just turn these down for continuity's sake. Anyway, so that's all my main tracks, except for the sends. I have them going out to 7 and 8 because I want the reverb to be stereo. And then I have the delay going to 9 and 10, also because I want that to be stereo. So, you know, if I had run out of tracks and I wanted to kind of consolidate things, I could potentially send these to the same track. So if I wanted reverb, if I wanted to not take up so many tracks with this, I could just send them both to 7 and 8. I could also potentially send these both to channel 4, to track 4 on the Big 6. And that way I would free up some stereo track for use with something else. But in this case, this is just kind of a rock song. This is just a demo I did for some people, and I had plenty of extra tracks on the Big 6, so I could spread everything out kind of how I wanted to. I mean, also with these guitars here, I could potentially send these to the stereo tracks. However, I do want to utilize the compressor on these tracks, so I can compress. I actually don't compress the guitar. I didn't end up compressing the guitar, but also I can take advantage of the full EQ here with the bell curves, whereas the stereo tracks don't have those. So, you have a lot of room, and of course, you don't have to set up your outputs here the same way that I did. You just have to set them however is convenient for you. So that's the main thing. First step, set your outputs on Ableton. Also, if you were following any of my other Big 6 videos, you'll know that there was kind of a discussion with Logic about the stereo output. On Ableton, by default, the stereo output goes to channels 15 and 16. So you don't have to change anything on this. If you haven't seen any of my other videos on the Big 6, don't worry about what I just said. You don't have to change anything. But if you were following kind of our discussion about Logic and the stereo outputs, then you don't have to change anything for the stereo output like you do on Logic. So that's definitely one nice thing about using the Big 6 with Ableton. So, okay, so I have all of my outputs set up on Ableton. So now let's go over to the Big 6. And so I have, these are the outputs that I'm using here, 1 through 3. 5 and 6 are the drums, 7 and 8 are one of the sends, and 9 and 10 are also the sends. So the next step is you got to come up here and hit the From USB button for all the tracks that you're using, which means that the audio will come out of your DAW, out of Ableton, into the Big 6. So I'll hit that, and then when we play the song, I'm going to make sure that I have this printed mix here muted. So when we play the song, then you'll notice that we have audio coming through here. Whereas if we didn't have these pressed in, you'll notice you have nothing coming out. So now, you know, essentially you kind of mix on the Big 6, but one thing I want to make clear, you'll notice that all my faders are set to 0. Now the reason for that is because if I were to mix using these faders and then print that and then go to another song or whatever, you know, I would have to change the faders for the next song, or if I wanted to track something or whatever it may be. So the nice thing is I don't have to remix this song every time that I pull it up on here because it's already mixed on Ableton. So that's another thing. Like I mentioned in the other video with Logic, I have a solid state Logic UF8, which is, if you're not familiar with that, it's basically a DAW control surface, and it has motorized faders. So I can use that to mix, and every time I pull up the project in Ableton, it will, you know, the faders will go to exactly where they were before. So that way I don't have to, you know, remix it every time, because of course that's not super efficient. So, and of course that's one of the beauties of a hybrid setup like this, where you have an analog board and then you have a digital workstation, of course, a DAW. So that's why I keep all the faders here at 0. So if I need to turn something up, for example, I'll come back over here, say the bass, and I mean I can already hear a couple problems. You know, like for example, I have way too much of the vocals going to the reverb. So, for example, I would turn that down here. I'm not going to go through, you know, this isn't really meant to be a video about mixing per se. So I'm not going to worry about my mix right here because I already have this song printed and finished. So, but that's, I just want to illustrate the point that if I wanted to, like say the drums are too loud, you know, I'd come over here and turn this down. You know, if the bass or the guitar was too loud, I'd, you know, say I wanted to turn down both at the same time, you know, you can do that. You know, using Command if you're on Apple, and then, you know, turn these down simultaneously. So anyway, again, this is not really meant to be a video on mixing, just showing you how to sum. So, okay, so let's play the song. As far as mixing goes, though, there are some things that I do on the Big 6. So I do normally compress the bass on here, so I would go ahead and hit that. And then, you know, I don't want to compress the bass too much, so I usually just watch the meter, you know, do something like that. You know, if I needed to increase the low end, for example, I would press, you know, enable the EQ, then I could do that here. You know, I might boost the low end just a little bit. You know, just quickly, I can definitely hear that the drums are a little loud, so I'll turn those down. Keep in mind I turned that down on Ableton. But yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time messing around with the mix on here. So I would compress the bass. You know, I'll leave the guitar uncompressed. Normally I would compress the vocals too. You know, I want those to be a little more slammed. Also, I don't want my drums to be peaking there, so I'll go ahead and turn that down over here. Turn the guitars down a little bit. So yeah, this is, again, this is your point where you want to, you know, mess with the mix on here. Also these, oh, this is why the drums were too loud. So one thing I've noticed here on the Big 6, you know, normally this is where you set your gain for your microphones. So one thing I've noticed here is that 1 through 4, when you're summing, is not affected by these gain knobs. So like, for example, let me turn up, or let me just solo the bass, well, and the guitar here. Okay, so if I turned up these gain knobs all the way, you notice they're not affected by that. The levels remain the same. However, for some reason, if I solo the drums, for example, which are on this stereo channel, if I turn this up, listen to what happens. They actually do get louder. So that was why my mix on Ableton was not the same from what I did before. So that's one thing you got to keep in mind, is make sure that these are all, you know, zeroed out. So that way you will retain your mix from Ableton. So there we go. So that's much closer to the mix that I had before. I believe the drums were, there we go. And then also I had turned down the sends over here. That would explain why I had them a little bit higher. Okay, so anyway, once you have your mix all set up, then the next step from here is you want to print your mix. So what you want to do is come back over here to Ableton and insert an audio track. I'm going to go ahead and just minimize that one. And then go ahead and just name it Master. I'll just name mine Master 2 since I already have a Master. Don't get it confused. Maybe you don't want to call it Master. You can call it like Print or something. Printed Mix. You know, you don't want to get it confused with the actual Master of Ableton, which in this case we're not using. So name it whatever you want. Printed Mix, you know, anything so you remember what exactly it is. So what you got to do here is set the input to 15 and 16, set the external output to 15 and 16 as well. So what this is going to do is record the main out of the Big 6. So this will record all those tracks mixed together. So just to reiterate what we have going on, all these tracks from our project, from our song, are going out to the Big 6, and then we're processing them on the Big 6 here, and then we are sending the audio back into the computer, and we're recording that audio. Also, one quick thing I forgot to mention, of course, is the wonderful G-Series bus compressor. So normally also I mix with that on. That's just kind of a personal choice. You know, you don't have to mix with the bus compressor enabled. The only thing that I find is that if you do a mix on Ableton, I know I said this wasn't going to be a video about mixing, but this does pertain to mixing, unfortunately. But if you go ahead and do a mix on Ableton and then you enable this bus compressor, it might change your mix a little bit. So I recommend enabling that. I also use the auto release pushed in. So let's go ahead and play the song. So I don't like to squash it too much. I usually like it to be right about there where it's, you know, the gain reduction is getting kind of up to 3, not quite all the way. So, you know, you use the threshold to set that, of course. That's what it sounds like squashed. Obviously, you're getting a lot of gain reduction. But I usually like it to be right about there. No. Yeah, right about there. Also, keep in mind this threshold knob is different from this threshold one, and of course, you know, you'll hopefully notice that right away if you read the label there. The plus is on the left here, and then over here the plus is on the right. So just keep that in mind when you're using these compressors. You know, you'll probably be turning it one way, and you'll wonder why the gain reduction is increasing or decreasing or whatever it may be. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But yeah, so once I have that that going, then it's time to print. Also, a couple things to keep in mind. I'm not going to go too much in depth into this, but this is your monitor source, whereas this is what's going into the main output. So right now, if we turn main off right here, then you still hear the song on the video, on the recording here, but to my monitors, I don't hear anything. So if you're not hearing anything through your monitors, but you still see stuff going on the faders, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but you probably need to press this one. So that way you have stuff coming out of your monitors. So this one you don't need right now. See, I can turn that off and everything stays the same. I still hear it coming through my monitors. So let's go ahead and print it. Okay, so go ahead and arm this for recording, and then all we have to do is record that track. Now, while that's recording, I won't let it record all the way since I've already done it. But another thing I wanted to mention here is this makeup gain. So if you're mastering this yourself, or you're just doing a quick, a quick master, to give to your client or to your bandmates or whatever it may be, to your friends, you want to use, well, you don't have to, but I highly recommend using the makeup gain here to push the volume as loud as you want it to go. So, normally with a compressor, you want the makeup gain to be even with what it sounds like when it's uncompressed. That's why it's called makeup gain, to make up for the difference in volume. Again, well, I don't really want this to be a video about compression, but I'm just telling you what I do. I use the makeup gain to boost the level. So that way I'm not pushing the level so much with my limiter after the fact. I'll show you what limiter I'm using here in a sec. But once you print your mix, you'll want, oh, let me show you real quick. Let me switch the cameras here. This makeup gain is what I was talking about on here. I have this boosted so, you know, my level is going up way more than if I wasn't using the compressor. So once this mix is printed, then I'll show you here. I'm going to go ahead and just stop the recording because, again, I've already printed it here on this track. So I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of that, mute that. So here's my printed mix. And then if you double click on here, you'll notice I have one lone plugin on here. And it is indeed the UAD Master Desk. So I use this as my limiter to push the volume the rest of the way. So initially I used the makeup gain on the Big 6 to push the volume quite a bit, and then I use this to push it the final, you know, over the finish line, so to speak. Also, I have my output trim here set to -0.1, so that way it's not clipping. And then all I do, you know, this isn't really a video on limiters, but I'll just show you guys what I do. So now, oh, also real quick, in order to listen to your printed mix, you want to come over here and press main. So you're not listening to main, you want to press external 2 here. And you can see that it says 15 and 16. So that way when you press in external 2 here, we're going to be listening to just the printed mix. You also want to make sure that your external 2 from USB 15 and 16 is pushed in. So that could be a problem. You might have your external 2 over here pushed in, but you also need to have this pushed in to make sure that it comes from USB 15 and 16. So that's how you'll listen to your printed mix, which goes over here to your monitor source 15 and 16 external 2. So if you're not hearing your printed mix in here, then that could be why. So make sure that's pushed in. If you come back over to Ableton, we play the song. If we disable this track, you can see that you get nothing. Switch back to the Big 6, all the tracks are going into the Big 6 for summing, but you don't hear anything coming out of the main because all we're trying to do is listen to the printed mix. We don't want to listen to these. So that's why there's nothing coming in here right now. So that's why you want external 2 pressed in, so that way you only listen to the printed mix. And then if you want to go back to summing, like you say you need to reprint it or something like that, then you would press external 2 out and press main back in. See, and that brings you back to your summing mode, so to speak. So right now we're just listening to the printed mix. So come over here and then enable this track. Okay, and you'll notice it's pretty loud. You know, that's because I have this pushed all the way. Well, not all the way, but what I look for usually is I like my dynamic range, you know, depending how loud I want it to be. I like it to be right around 6. If I want it to be a little bit louder of a song, you know, I want it to be between 6 and 5. But this is my sweet spot. This is what I look for. You know, I don't look at LUFS or anything like that. You know, LUFS are not something you need to worry about here unless you're working with TV. But this is what I look for. And then, you know, this is a nice plug-in, side note, because it has like these nice filters over here. You know, you can use this to filter out some of those bad frequencies. And then you can use this EQ here to kind of shape it. I set the mono maker up to about 100, so everything below 100 is monoed. And then I don't really mess with stereo enhancement too much. You know, I feel like a lot of that can be a bad thing. So, but yeah, so that's pretty much it. And then at this point, the final thing you got to worry about is printing it to a file, of course. So you come over here, go to File, Export Audio and Video, and then this is where you don't want to get confused. By default, Ableton will export the actual master, which is this one right here. However, in this case, I guess this is why it's a good idea to probably not name your printed mix master. But I mean, even if you do like I did, just make sure that you print the right one, that you export the right one, which would be this one down here. You know, these are all the individual tracks, of course. You know, as long as you're familiar with Ableton, you know, this shouldn't be a problem. But, you know, this is the printed mix down here, or the one named printed mix that we created during this video. But for me, it would be this one that I called master. And then, of course, set your start and your length and all that. Set your file type, and then you would hit export. But I'm not going to go ahead and do that right now. But so once you hit export, of course, you will export this track by itself with this plugin on it, and then there you go. That's pretty much it. So yeah, hopefully that wasn't too confusing for you guys. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them down below. And yeah, if you have any requests for any more Big 6 stuff, let me know, or requests for any other kind of videos, definitely let me know. Any comments, concerns, leave those down below. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video.